Good afternoon. This is Ned Porter, um, Director of National and Regional Policy for Wholesome Wave. Want to welcome participants to the Advocacy and Food and Agriculture Policy Perspectives of National Farm and Food Advocacy experts. We're going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill and a little bit about the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, and a little bit about advocacy. We'll get started in a minute or two as people are still logging in. But I want to take this time to say at the outset that afterward, we'll be sending out a survey monkey with the aim of improving our products in the future. We hope you would participate in helping us by completing the survey and make for a better product next go around. For those of you who are on and are familiar with GoToMeeting webinars, on the panel, the control panel, the 1, 2, 3, fourth pull down tab is questions. Submit your questions written, and I will be fielding them, and I will be moderating the question section after each Sarah and Helen's parts. So that would be the way to get questions asked, through me and that electronic wizardry there. It's 4 past, and we've got 33 people registered, so I'm going to get started. As I said, this Food and Ag Policy webinar is intended to help you understand what the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act are, and each is important to all three of us. This webinar consists of Wholesome Wave, a National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and the National Farm to School Network. And so we're going to be presenting what's in each and what the differences are. And we're also hoping to give you a better understanding of the process for the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, and what may be happening with amendments as they come through. And I'll briefly be touching on nutrition incentives, which are important to what Wholesome Wave does. And then hopefully we've given you enough education that you feel empowered to participate in the process going forward, because it's going to be a lively session in the House when that comes up. The agenda is pretty straightforward. Sarah Hackney with the National Sustainable Ag Coalition is going to talk about Advocacy 101, and she'll take 20 minutes to do that. There'll be 10 minutes of questions afterward. She'll be followed by Helen Dombalis with the National Farm to School Network. She'll speak for 20 minutes, and then there'll be questions on that, and then there'll be sort of a wrap up and let you know what's going on. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sarah. Sarah mobilizes farmers and their allies across the country to reform and improve federal food and farm policy in Washington, D.C. She's worked for more than 10 years to bring together farmers, consumers, and communities to shape solutions that work. She's an avid home cook and gardener, and in the past, her work has focused on improving small farm viability, increasing access to fresh food, and building leadership in rural communities. She has a BA from Dartmouth College, and without further ado, Sarah, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Ned. Can you hear me? I hope folks can any of our presenters hear me? Just want to make sure my audio is working okay. We're going to take that as...
Yes. Hey, Sarah, your sound is
yes?
great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Just wanted to make sure. I've been on webinars before where that wasn't the case. So awesome. Thank you guys. Hey everybody. Thanks so much for making some time to join us this afternoon. I will say your timing is fantastic. If you're interested in food and farm policy, there is no better time to be getting engaged with what's going on, because it is literally in action right now in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to talk. So Helen, my friend Helen, is going to get into some of the nuts and bolts of just what exactly is the Farm Bill, and what does federal policy look like in a few minutes. But before we go there, I'm just going to do a little bit of big picture discussion about what does advocacy look like for someone like you who's busy. You've got a job, you've got a life, you've got a farm maybe, or a farmer's market. What does advocacy look like, and why does it matter, and how can you do it effectively with limited time? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and hopefully then when Helen comes on, you'll have both the how-to and the motivation to say, yeah, I do want to get involved in this. So just a little bit of background. I work for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition based in Washington, D.C. NSAC has been around for 25 years, and we work here in Washington on a huge array of issues, from conservation to local food, and we work on pretty much every big piece of food and farm policy that comes out of Congress. We basically, if it has to do with food and farms, we probably work on it. And it's really our job to make sure that federal policy here in D.C. helps farmers succeed, protects the environment, and keeps our food safe and accessible. That includes things like making sure that farmers can access conservation programs on their farm, to helping protect and improve sources of funding for farmers markets, for local food initiatives, for food hubs, everything under the sun. At NSAC, I'm the grassroots director, and I work directly with both nonprofits and people like you, farmers, consumers, everybody in between, to help connect them to and engage them with federal policy. In a past life, I ran a small nonprofit, and I've also been a farmer, so I've been on the other side, and it's a real honor to get to help folks like you get involved in what I used to think was this very distant, very far away stuff. It's actually not. So let's just make a few things clear up front to get us started. Your senators and representative in Congress, they represent you. Whether you're a consumer, a farmer, someone who works for a nonprofit or a local business, whether you're in local government, they represent you. And it is their job as legislators to listen to you. And your job as a citizen to make sure they know what's up and what matters to you. I like to say that your civic duty doesn't end at the ballot box. The vote is a really powerful tool, but it's just as important once your legislators are in office to make sure they know what matters to you. Because if you don't tell them, they may not know. Another important thing to know, being an advocate does not necessarily require being a total expert. You don't have to be you don't have to be like the biggest poobah in your community. You don't have to be someone with a PhD to have an opinion or a belief or sort of an experience that matters and that can shape policy. And another thing, we get a lot of questions about this. Nonprofit organizations can and should advocate. There are rules about how and when they can do so. If you're unsure about that, if you or your board is not sure, we recommend checking out the resources at Alliance for Justice. They're a national nonprofit. I can't remember their website off the top of my head, but it's just Alliance for Justice. If you Google that, they've got really great, clear resources for any nonprofits who might be a little concerned, wanting to make sure that when they advocate, they do it safely and legally. Just want to make sure you totally can. But here's the most important part, and I'll say it, said it once, I'll say it again. Your constituent, every single one of you, has 2 senators and a representative here in Congress. You've got to vote. You also have an important story to tell. If you're on the call today, that's because you care about this kind of work, about food and farm policy. And your story, the reason that you are interested, is something that's important for them to hear. And most importantly, they want to hear from you. We hear it all the time. We work here in DC. They don't ever hear it. They would so much rather hear from a constituent back home who can talk to them about where they come from, about what's going on at home, than they would hear from an army of lobbyists here in Washington. You have that pleasure. They actually want to hear from you. So let's go behind the curtain a little bit just to set the stage. A lot of folks, before I moved to DC, I didn't really understand how policy got made, and I kind of wondered, well, why doesn't Congress do anything? What is going on? Are those people just sitting around twiddling their thumbs all the time? Because I don't see a lot of action coming out. So Congress, despite the gridlock you see on the news, there's a lot that goes on here. They're really busy. And even if that doesn't always result in a bill getting passed, for better or worse, there's a lot going on, a lot of information, a lot of lobbying, just it's constant madhouse on the Hill. So every single legislator here in Washington has a staff based in DC, and they're tasked with working on certain policy issues like agriculture or education. Those staffers, they're folks, they work directly for that legislator. They handle a huge range of issues within just that subject area. So for example, if you're in the Senate or if you're in the House, you might be a staffer. You might be about 25 or 26 years old, and you handle maybe agriculture and energy policy for your representative. And what that means is that you need to be on top of every single piece of legislation that may come up in the House that involves those sort of fields, and every piece of information or every part of every piece of legislation. And so when we think about just agriculture, just the Farm Bill, it's a huge piece of legislation. It covers, and Helen will talk more about this in a bit, it's almost $1 trillion bill. It's one version can be over 1,000 pages long. And there's just to understand crop insurance, just to understand how the food stamp program works, can take someone a really long time to truly understand it. And so you can imagine for a staffer, they've got a lot to keep them busy. And they're responsible for keeping their senator and representative fully briefed and handling all the nitty-gritty of knowing what's going on, of reviewing the language, drafting amendments, talking to other folks, trying to get support for an issue. And all of that's happening on 50 different fronts at any given time. And as you can imagine, it's a lot to handle, and sometimes, and what that means, for better or worse, sometimes that turns into problems. Sometimes that makes it really difficult. For you might know really well what works really well at your farmer's market, what works really well if you've applied for a federal grant, and what hasn't. I've applied for federal grants. I know they can be really complicated. You know that really well because you've done it, but these staffers may have never written one. So you can see it's important for them to hear from people who've been directly impacted by the policy they're doing, because for someone at that level, there's no way they can have a personal experience of every issue that's going to cross their desk. So they're hot on the trail for people like you who can help them understand how something works on the ground and why it needs support and how it could be improved. So a little more, why do I want to advocate? What's in it? Why does this matter? And I'll split it. There's a couple of things here, and I'll kind of split it on a couple of lines. I know there's folks on the call from all sorts of backgrounds, and like I said earlier, advocacy is for everyone, no matter what level of expertise you have. If you have 5 minutes, you have time to take part, and we'd love to have you. A couple of reasons why. Like I said earlier, it's never take for granted that your legislator knows what's going on back home. Even if you live and breathe it, they may not have ever heard of it. So it's really great. It helps educate your legislators about what you're doing and why it matters. Like I said earlier as well, it helps you become a reliable resource. These staffers, that's one of the most valuable things that they look for, is who back home is familiar with an issue and can kind of help me understand what it looks like. So for farmers, we work with a lot of farmers who've used, say, the Value Added Producer Grant Program. It's a program that helps, that provides some grant funding for farmers looking to do something to add value to a product, say, taking fresh green beans and flash freezing them so they can sell to schools. It's a great program, and a lot of times legislators won't even heard of it until the farmer calls up and says, hey, this program really helped me grow my business. I'd like you to support it. And they say, oh, wow, we had no idea. That's great. It also builds support for an issue. The old phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, is not a well-known phrase for nothing. It's true here in DC. If they don't ever hear from anybody back home about an issue, they simply assume it doesn't matter back home. And we know that's very often not the case. And if you're a consumer or a farmer, again, just getting in the habit of making sure they know what's up. For folks on the call who may work for nonprofits, who may say maybe you're a Wholesome Wave or a National Farm to School Network partner, and so you're engaged in some of these sort of long-term efforts around nutrition incentives or around improving farm to school policy, For you especially, that issue education and relationship building is absolutely critical. I can tell, I said it once, I'll say it again, they don't want to hear from us in Washington. It's really my job to make sure that people like you out in the field, because you guys know 10 times what any of us do about how something really works on the ground, and we can provide good information, but what they really want is they want to hear from you. Let's see if we, slide. There we go. And so does it make a difference? So you say, okay, I get it. They're really busy. Congress is kind of a madhouse. I could see where maybe, my opinions, my experience here at home could matter. I think I get it. I guess I would advocate if you want me to, if you need my help. Does it make a difference? Does it actually impact what happens here in DC? And the answer is absolutely yes. We would not have in the Farm Bill any money for things like farmers markets, for things like nutrition incentives, for things like conservation on the farm. We would have none of that without the many, many years of long and sustained work from organizations and grassroots folks like you. So absolutely yes. And let me just give you one example. So we've been working in the Senate right now on the Farm Bill, and one of the pieces that INSAC and a number of its members have been working on is trying to reform some of the more expensive pieces of the bill, including federal crop insurance program, which right now subsidizes relatively high-earning wealthy farmers at a very high rate. And the take of many groups is, that's unnecessary. We could do better. We could put that money to better use in other ways. Now, Senate leadership, they weren't too keen about that. They kind of, they'd faced a lot of lobbying to say, no, we need to keep it exactly where it is. And the thing that made the difference, the thing that helped us to achieve a really great first step in the Senate just 2 weeks ago was really a three-part piece. It was people on the Hill meeting with offices. It was voters like you calling and emailing by the thousands around the country saying, we're paying attention. This is not a place where we want you to be investing our tax dollars. We want you to invest it somewhere better. And then the media picked up on it. The media said, oh, wow, okay, this is really big. And what that does is that tells your senator representative, wow, people back home care about this. I want to make sure I vote in line with what my constituents feel. So, okay, it helps. It's awesome. It really makes a difference. How do you do it? We'll just go through one example. There's a lot of ways to be an advocate. We're just going to go through one today to give you a little bit of a sense, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So pretty easy, 3 simple steps. Let's start with step 1, do your homework. So one of the things that that is the fastest way to not be helpful in terms of advocacy is to not not pay attention to kind of what's going on and where we are, what exactly is going on in Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you, a good action alert or an email or a call to action from an organization like the National Farm to School Network or Wholesome Wave or the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, if it's done well, it should give you all the information you need to reach out. But you want to make sure you know what's going on, aka what's at stake right now. Where is the action? Is the Senate at work? Is the House at work? Is this something that is at the president's desk? You want to do a little thinking. Why does this matter to me? This is an issue that impacts my farm. This is an issue that impacts my farmer's market. This is something I care about as a consumer. And how does it impact me? Like I said, this is not a 2-hour Google adventure. This is something that a good action alert or our website should be able to tell you. But you want to make sure you know. I can't tell you, I monitor a Twitter account, and a lot of people will retweet. Sometimes we'll see someone retweeting something from a year or 2 ago, and we say, well, oh, they probably should have checked that link before they retweeted because that happened 2 years ago. So it's worth taking that 5 minutes just to make sure you have a little sense of what's going on. And number 2, okay. So you said, all right, I got this great email. I hear what's going on. It looks like Congress is working on the Farm Bill, and there's an opportunity to increase funding for some programs that will really help my community. Awesome. I'm going to make a phone call. It is about the easiest thing in the world, and we're going to spend a few minutes walking through it. So the first thing you got to do is you got to dial the number. Good email or website should include the number for your rep or your senator or the congressional switchboard where you can just tell them where you'd like to be sent. And it's really simple. These are offices that's, like I said earlier, it's their job to listen to you. They want to listen to you. There's somebody in every single office on Capitol Hill who answers the phone. And they hire those people to be friendly, to be welcoming, and they're people who are really people. They got a like answer on the telephone. So you greet that person. It's probably, someone who sits up front at the office. You introduce yourself. You say, hey, this is, my name's so-and-so. I'm a voter back home. And then you want to ask, in the case of the Farm Bill, to speak to their agricultural legislative assistant. When how we talk about everybody has a staff here in D.C., that agriculture legislative assistant is the person who handles Farm Bill policy. So that's the person who can really help answer your questions and who really needs to hear what you have to say. You might get that person on the line and you might get a voicemail. Either way is okay. They'll transfer you over. You'll introduce yourself again, deliver your pitch, and be sure to leave your name or number. And always be polite. We'll go over that a little more. So I'll just show you a little sample here. This is as easy as it gets right here. Hey, my name is Sarah. I'm a constituent. I'm a voter. I'm also a concerned citizen, I made a lot of calls when I was the farmers market manager, I can assure you. I understand the 2013 Farm Bill is being debated this week. I would love to ask you to please support, amendment number, whatever. This issue is important for our community because farmers markets are huge economic drivers. They're growing by leaps and bounds, and I'd like federal policy to support them. Thanks for your time. My name's Sarah, and here's my phone number. It's as easy as that. Takes probably about 2 minutes if you get a voicemail, less time than it takes to write an email. And so why am I talking about phone calls? Just real quick, you saw I put the little 3 steps, Number 2 wasn't send an email or sign a petition. Number 2 was make a call. Why did I say that? Why does that matter? I put it in really big font. 5-minute phone calls really matter. So in Washington, as you can imagine, all these legislators' they get lobbied heavily by professional lobbyists here in Washington, by grassroots voices like you. They're flooded every day with a lot of people asking for a lot of things on 50 different issues at a time. They, just like you and I, know full well that it takes a little bit more effort to pick up the telephone these days than it does to send an email. And when their boss comes in and asks for support or what the public is feeling about an issue, saying, we got 100 people who took the time to make a phone call and tell us personally why it mattered, counts way more than we got 1,000 form emails that were the same. Which is not to say you can never email. Can't hurt, especially if you're in a hurry, you're out in the field, you don't have time to make a call. You can't make a call, don't have cell reception. But we see it here. As few as 4 or 5 phone calls can help to really sway a legislator to support a key issue, whereas it takes a lot of emails to do that. So we often here at INTAC recommend a phone call, and I'll pass that on to you. If you have 5 minutes and you say, well, what is the #1 best thing I can do in 5 minutes? It is to get comfortable picking up that phone and making a quick call. I'll say they're not scary. You can be a farmer. You could be out on your tractor and make a call. You could be at the farmer's market and make a call. That's all good. We have a lot of people that love to do that. And so let's see if we can get that next slide to pop up there. Here we go. So following up. So, okay, you got the call to action. You said, yeah, this matters to me. I've got 5 minutes. You made a call. Awesome. You have just done more than 80% of other people, and we love you. Thank you. What next? Here's where the rubber hits the road, especially for folks like you who might work for nonprofits, for folks who have applied for federal grants, who have seen that side of the coin. Follow-up is key. If you don't have time, the call's the most important thing, but here's where you could really take it to the next level. After you make that call, go ahead and send a follow-up email. I know I said email is secondary, but it can't hurt. Sending a follow-up email saying, thanks for your time, just going to reiterate how I feel. Sometimes you might actually talk to a person. You might talk to the staffer, and they say, oh, wow, that sounds like an amazing project. Would you send me some information? Go ahead and send it to them right away. And then importantly, 2 more things for like the Super Gold Star Advocate Award. Keep an eye on what happens next. what did your senator or representative take the position you hoped they would on that issue? What actually ends up happening? And if they do, we want to make sure they know that. They, like everyone, love they love praise. I like praise, you like praise. Your senator loves praise. If they take a vote you like, if they come out and support a program or an issue, we want to make sure we thank them. You can use Twitter, Facebook, email, telephone, whatever works for you. And then for those of you who maybe work with a farmer's market or have a warehouse or a food hub or anything along those lines, a school, a really awesome farm to school program, get in touch with your senators and representatives' field staff. They all have staff based back home, back in their home state, and they love to look for events and places that the representative or senator can visit when he or she is home. You probably are doing amazing things, and there's no better way to drive that home than to invite them out. They may or may not take you up on the offer, but they'll appreciate being invited. When I lived and worked in Oregon, we always invited our legislators to events, and sometimes they showed up, and it really made a difference. Also, they're kind of fun, and then you get to see as a real person at the other end of the line, which is awfully nice. So just a couple what to expect wrap-ups, and then I'm going to hand it over for questions. Here's a few things that may not be evident, but it's great to know going in to being an advocate. When you pick up the telephone to reach out, when you talk to a district staffer or anybody else involved on Capitol Hill, don't expect them to be an extreme expert in the issues that you care about. They'll probably know a little bit, they probably won't know a lot, and they may or may not know how it impacts your community. Again, that's why you are so awesome and so valuable. Like you'll probably get a lot of voicemails. Folks are busy, especially when you get a call to action. It's a busy time typically, and so you may get a voicemail. Totally okay. Folks tend to be hesitant on the Hill to commit to anything, particularly if it asks for money. So don't be surprised if after you make a call, it doesn't guarantee support for something. Know that that call and that work matters anyway. Folks will generally be friendly. It's their job to be friendly. You're a voter. They love you. And really importantly, consistency and politeness is rewarded. If you stay regularly in polite, friendly, frequent communication with your senators and your representatives on the issues that you care about, what's going to happen is you're going to start to build a relationship. They're going to start to trust you as someone back home who is genuinely engaged, who cares, and who has sort of a voice and an experience to share that matters. And that helps all of us to build the kind of champions we need here on Capitol Hill to make change for better food and farm policy. And with that, I will turn it over for questions.
Well, thanks for that. We've concise description of advocacy. The one question we've had pop up so far is, I guess, go over again how to get a hold of the legislative assistant that is in each office, because somebody want to know what's the phone number for the legislative assistants. And
that's a great question.
Yeah.
So, so what you can do, the easiest way to do that is you can either use what's called the Congressional Switchboard, and if you just Google Congressional Switchboard, you'll get that number. That's kind of an old school switchboard where you pick it up and you'll be connected with your senator or representative's office. And when the person answers the line in that office, all you have to do is simply identify yourself and ask for, and say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm a voter, I'm also, I'm also a farmer. I would like to talk to, Senator Merkley's agriculture legislative assistant, please. And that's all it takes, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And that term, the agriculture legislative assistant, is going to be the same in the Senate and House, and that's going to get you through. And as you get to know people, it's pretty typical that you'll call that main line and get connected through. And once you get on the phone with them, go ahead and ask their name. Have a little chit chat if you get time, if they have time and you have time. Get to know who they are a little bit, and make sure you do get their name. And likely, if you have a real conversation and you are able to, they ask for some follow-up information, they'll send you as well their email, and then you can be in touch that way as well.
And another one I'd like to add to that, if I may, Sarah, is that most of the three of us, the National Farm to School, NSAC, and Wholesome Wave, if we send out action alerts, they will, and asking people to call their members of Congress or the senators, we'll have a search function. You type in your zip or your zip +5, and it will pop up with the contact information as well. So there's two ways to go about that.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, a good action alert is going to give you that number and make sure you have, that's what, our job as organizers is to make sure that folks like you guys have the tools you need to quickly and easily make a call. Absolutely.
Okay, if there appear to be no more questions coming in on this part of it, we're going to bring Sarah back toward the end to talk about next steps and wrap up, help with wrap up. But for now, I'm going to hand off to Helen Dombalis. She serves as the Policy and Strategic Partnerships Director for the National Farm to School Network. It's good to see someone whose job title is more of a mouthful than mine, so thank you for that, Helen. She has researched the role of local and regional food systems in bolstering community economic development and public health. She serves as a policy co-chair for the American Public Health Association's Food and Environment Working Group. A native of Raleigh, North Carolina, she received a Master of Public Health and a Master of Social Work from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with that, I'll hand the baton over to Helen.
Great, thanks, Ned. I'm delighted to be here today. So good afternoon, everyone. Before I dive into Policy and Advocacy 101 and really get into specifics of the legislative process and the Farm Bill and Child Nutrition Bill, I'll just spend a few slides providing folks with information about the National Farm to School Network, since some of you might not be familiar with us. I know the food systems work that Wholesome Wave does is really connected to the work that we do at the Farm to School Network. It's all part of local and regional food system development. So I just want to be sure to highlight who we are and what we do so you know how to stay connected to our network after this webinar ends. So with that, just to start, as it says here on the slide, the National Farm to School Network envisions a nation in which farm to school programs are an essential component of strong and just local and regional food systems, ensuring the health of children, farms, the environment, the economy, and communities. So as you can see here in the vision of the National Farm to School Network, it very closely aligns both with Wholesome Wave and the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, of which we are a member organization. So when we talk about farm to school programs, I want folks to keep in mind that it's an approach as opposed to a predefined program. I do get that question a lot of kind of how do you start the farm to school program? So it's a set of practices that really make the whole, but not a specific prescribed approach. So broadly, farm to school initiatives connect schools and farmers and communities, as I said before, in this larger movement to really strengthen local and regional food systems and reinvigorate local economies. So as you can see on the slide, there are kind of 4 distinct components of farm to school. Local procurement, so getting local food into school cafeterias and into school meal programs, school gardens, food and agriculture curriculum, and then the last is experiential education, and that's everything from farm tours to cooking demonstrations to taste tests. So a lot of different activities. This slide shows our network, the Farm to School Network. So I'm one of our national staff, and then we have regional leads, which I'll show in a moment, and state leads. And I want to highlight this for you all just so you know that no matter where you live, there's an opportunity and a way to stay connected to our network. And then beyond our regional leads and state leads, it extends down to the more than 7,000 food service directors, farmers, parents, and others who have joined our movement. So we have the Farm to School Network divided up into 8 regions that are listed here, the regional lead agencies, and I'll just leave this slide up for a minute so you can see which region you're in and make sure you know how to connect with the organization that heads up Farm to School for your region. And then, as I mentioned, we also have a Farm to School lead in each state and also DC, so you can contact someone in your local area if you ever have questions about Farm to School. Finally, I just want to mention two special events. Save the date for our annual Farm to Cafeteria Conference, which takes place next year, April 15th through 18th in Austin, Texas. And as you will note, the title of the conference goes beyond just farm to school. It includes farm to hospital, farm to college, farm to prison, and so forth. So really broadly looking at local procurement and local purchasing for institutional markets. And then also Congress designated a couple of years ago October as Farm to School Month. So each year we celebrate Farm to School Month in October, and just want to flag that for folks. You can visit the website listed there on the slide to learn more information about how to get involved. All right, so I will now dig into the meat of this presentation, really talking about policy, how a bill becomes a law in the legislative process, and then we'll walk through the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Reauthorization. So this graphic shows the legislative process in a simplified fashion. So laws are first written, or in other words, starting at the top, Congress authorizes legislation. And then unless a program has automatic or what they call mandatory funding, it has to go through an annual process for getting funding, which is your appropriation, so that next line down. So each year, Congress has given a list of programs that are essentially authorized to receive money. So the law says they can get money on an annual basis, but then Congress has to choose from among all of the various options what to actually fund in a given year. So I just want to make that point because it's not just important to follow the authorization, so the Farm Bill or the Child Nutrition Bill when the laws get written, but also engaging on an annual basis to make sure that programs get funded. So then after you have your authorization and appropriation, implementation is where the relevant agency implements the laws. So for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, is implementing, I'll give two examples that folks probably on this webinar are familiar with, the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program and the Farm to School grants. So those programs were written into law, and then USDA is tasked with then implementing them, distributing funds every year, and really making sure the programs operate as intended by law. So then finally, we have your evaluation down at the bottom. And really, this is where you take a look at how policies have been implemented. So what did the law say, and then what's actually happened in terms of funding on an annual basis? How is the agency implemented? And then take a look in reauthorization processes like the Farm Bill or like the Child Nutrition Bill to kind of start the process over again. So it's not so much a straight top to bottom as it is a circle, really going through an evaluation, seeing what needs to be tweaked, because then if you get a chance for reauthorization, this process kind of begins anew. Oops, sorry folks, my slides are not advancing. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to just spend a couple minutes now walking through the legislative process in more detail. And Sarah has gone through some of this briefly in terms of what's happening with the Farm Bill, but I just want to make sure that you all can kind of see the various steps in the process and how you can be engaged. So as I mentioned, you start with your authorization, so getting the laws written. So the first step in that process is actually getting the legislation drafted and written. So members of Congress, senators, and representatives can write legislation. Their staff can write legislation. And then as the slide notes, advocacy groups like Wholesome Wave or the National Farm to School Network or NSAC can write legislation, and then all of you. So legislation can really be shaped and influenced by each and every one of you that's on this webinar today. You can give ideas from your community about what's needed, what tweaks would be helpful, what new program might be important, and share that with members of Congress or with advocacy groups to really make sure that what you're wanting is written into law. So then after that happens, a member of Congress will introduce the bill, the piece of legislation. It'll get assigned a bill number, and then it'll get assigned to a committee and subcommittee based on its relevancy and the issues covered in the bill. So from there, once the bill is assigned to the committee, it will go through a series of, as you can see here, hearings, and then a committee vote. So hearings are basically where experts are brought in to testify and share information that can help inform the knowledge level of the members of Congress with respect to the piece of legislation that's being discussed. So, you know, one of you could come in and talk about how the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program or a farm to school grant has worked for you and in your community. And then you have a markup, which is essentially where the committee goes through a process of making amendments to the bill. And then finally, once they've gone through that amendment process, voting and assuming it passes out of committee, moving it to the next step in the process, which is the floor. And so for the floor, that simply means the full Senate or the full House. So from there, the process, as we saw with the committee, kind of starts again. You go through the bill again, you have a debate, you have more amendments, and then you have a full vote like you did in the committee. And then assuming that the bill passes out of the Senate and passes out of the House, the next step is the conference committee. And the conference committee is just a way of saying that you pull together members of Congress that have been involved with the bill in the Senate and the House to kind of compare the two bills. Because at this point, you've got your Senate version of the bill and your House version of the bill, and there are going to be discrepancies in policy, discrepancies in funding. So needing to take those two versions of the bill and pull them together, compare and contrast, and come up with an agreement on a final merged version that goes, as the next bullet point shows, back to the Senate and the House to approve of that conference bill. And then assuming that happens, assuming the full Senate and House agree on that conference bill and vote on it, it of course then goes to the president to sign or veto the bill. So I know that's a lot. Again, the main takeaway and the reason I wanted to walk through that is that there are so many opportunities for all of you to get involved throughout the entire legislative process. So it's everything from providing ideas for legislation to simply just answering questions and talking about the work that you all do. You know, Sarah talked about that earlier. And then things like, of course, calling your senators to vote on an amendment. So there's so many different ways and so many in the process that you all can really help shape our nation's policy. So I just want to make a note here about omnibus legislation because that's a term that's often thrown around when we're talking about bills like the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Bill. And basically, omnibus is it's a fancy way of saying a compilation of a lot of different laws. So I've written down here two examples. So the Farm Bill is omnibus legislation. It takes lots of different smaller pieces of law and lumps them all together to get reauthorized on a regular basis. And then the same goes for the child nutrition reauthorization. So one example of a law that's included in the Farm Bill is, as the slide says, the Farmer to Consumer Direct Marketing Act, which gets into, as the name implies, farmers markets and other ways that farmers are really selling directly to consumers. And then for CNR, the Child Nutrition Bill, that gets into and includes the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act. So again, just want to get folks to notice that when we're talking about the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Bill, it's actually lots of little bills that make them up. As the slide says, the Farm Bill and CNR are reauthorized about every 5 years, about being, of course, the key word because as we've seen for folks who've been watching with this Farm Bill reauthorization, it doesn't actually happen about every 5 years it's written into law. And then lastly, just I want to make a note because I've gotten this question a lot also. Each time the reauthorization, you've got new members of Congress, you've got different chairs and ranking members who really care about particular issues. So the bills get new names. So the 2008 Farm Bill, for example, as you can see, was the Food Conservation and Energy Act. And then we're expecting this time, if we wrap up the Farm Bill this year, the economy and jobs is a really important issue right now for the U.S. So we're seeing the titles of the potential farm bills this time around having jobs in the title. So it changes every time depending on what's relevant and important and who's in leadership. And then 2010, this child nutrition reauthorization was called the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. So here's the full picture for the Farm Bill. Thanks to the work of Sarah and the National Sustainable Ag Coalition for designing this really useful and beautiful graphic that helps lay the process. As you can see, if you look up at the top, you've got your agriculture committees in the Senate and the House. They marked up or amended their versions of the Farm Bill back in mid-May. Where we are now, the Senate is right now in the process on the floor, as the graphic shows, of debating their version of the Farm Bill. And then the week of June 17th, it's expected that the House will start their version of the process. And then, again, just to recap, assuming the full Senate and House complete their versions, it'll go back to conference, then go back to each of the bodies for a final vote. And then, of course, the last step again is going to the White House. So, again, reiterating, so many steps in the process, so many ways for you all to be involved. So I'm now going to just spend a couple of minutes going through some specifics on what's in the Farm Bill, what it costs, and answering some of those kind of what's included basic Farm Bill 101 questions. So this is a list, and the graphic also shows what the titles or kind of chapters of the 2008 Farm Bill were. A lot of people think of the Farm Bill and know it as having two primary thrusts. So SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly called food stamps, and then commodity programs. And when people hear the Farm Bill, those are the things that they most often think about. But the truth is, as you can see here, that the Farm Bill really funds a whole range of other titles and programs and policies, everything from rural development to conservation to organic agriculture and farmers markets. So there's a lot in there, and thus a lot of key folks involved, which I'll show you in a moment. So because of who we've got on the webinar today, I want to specifically show, before we get to the Child Nutrition Act, what's in the nutrition title of the Farm Bill, so you can kind of compare to what you're going to see in a minute is in the Child Nutrition Bill. So as I mentioned, we've got SNAP, formerly called food stamps. You've got the Emergency Food Program, Community Food Projects, the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, a Department of Defense Fresh Program to supply schools with fruits and vegetables. And then I put on there, and Ned will probably mention this in a minute, but a question mark as to whether or not nutrition incentives will be new for 2013 for the Farm Bill, which I know many of the folks on the line really care about and are passionate about, and that Wholesome Wave has helped champion. And then along with nutrition title, thinking about the broader local food system movement, you've got rural development programs that fund value-added agriculture and also infrastructure for things like food hubs. And then, of course, your research and marketing programs really help support local food, make sure that we know about the impacts of local food systems, and we know that marketing programs work to really help bolster those food systems. So as you can see, from the previous slide, there's so much that goes into the Farm Bill, and then even specific to what you all are interested in, there's just so much included and so much covered. So we mentioned earlier from the overview slide that the legislative process includes the first step being authorization, or establishing the laws. So I just wanted to make a note that the committees who are responsible for that step, for kind of writing the law, are called the authorizing committees. So for the Farm Bill, that's the Senate and House Agriculture Committees. And then on the right-hand slide, we've talked about what's been happening with the Farm Bill more recently, but just want to make a note that the 2008 Farm Bill actually expired October of last year, and then over New Year's, Congress extended the Farm Bill, which will expire this coming October. And so that's why now, this spring and this summer, they're in the midst of trying to get a full 5-year reauthorization completed. before that extension of the bill expires. So as I showed earlier, you've got these various titles or chapters of the Farm Bill. And so what that means is that you also have, as I mentioned, a lot of key players. So because there are so many different issues that are covered in the Farm Bill, that also means that there are a lot of folks who have investment in making sure that the Farm Bill looks the way it looks for their interest. And again, as I note at the very bottom, this includes all of you, being key players and really helping shape what's included in the Farm Bill. And finally, before we switch to the child nutrition reauthorization, I mentioned this earlier, but folks kind of think of the Farm Bill as having the two big thrusts. The biggest, as you can see in red, is SNAP and other nutrition programs, and then behind that, commodity programs. Crop insurance and conservation are smaller down. This is kind of the breakout from 2008, but important to note that there is a good chunk of programs, as I mentioned earlier, that all of us care about, that do make up a much smaller but obviously important piece of the Farm Bill. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears because I want to, even though we're in the midst right now and things are, hot and heavy for the Farm Bill, I want to make sure that folks understand how the Farm Bill really compares to the Child Nutrition Bill, because that's the next big thing that'll be coming up for myself and a lot of other folks that are on the line. So as you can see on the slide, the Child Nutrition Bill includes federal school meal programs and other child nutrition programs. So I mentioned earlier, reauthorization happens about every 5 years. So the 2010 bill, the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, was drafted to expire in 5 years, which means it expires September 30th of 2015. So earlier in the slides, and Sarah referenced this also, the legislative process, it takes time. And that's why, even though it's only 2013 now, there are some very preliminary conversations happening about the child nutrition reauthorization for 2015. Obviously, folks are very much engaged right now in getting the Farm Bill done, but we anticipate in the fall and early next year, assuming the Farm Bill is done, to really shifting gears and getting ready for the Child Nutrition Bill, starting to introduce draft pieces of legislation, starting to share ideas and get ready. So the relevant committees, the authorizing committees, I just want to note it's the same for the Senate. It's the Agriculture Committee that has jurisdiction both for CNR and for the Farm Bill. But in the House, I just want to note that it's a different committee. It's actually the House Education and Workforce Committee, meaning that for folks who will be engaged with the Child Nutrition Bill in the next couple of years, there will be some new members of Congress, some new players, some new staff, and then obviously new organizations to engage with. So what's in CNR? I've got the list up here of a lot of the key programs that are included. I mentioned earlier already the National School Lunch Program. You've also got the School Breakfast Program, a food program for child and adult care centers, summer food service and after school programs, WIC, program for women, infants, and children, and also the WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program, special milk program, and then I added down at the bottom the Farm to School Grant Program that was created in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010, or was funded for the first time in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. So I want to note here that this list of programs kind of has a traditional home in CNR, though sometimes changes are made to them in the Farm Bill or in other ways. So, for example, there are some programs or provisions right now moving through the Farm Bill that does have impacts on a couple of these programs listed here, which obviously makes it more complicated to keep track of. But I think it's still important to know that these are the traditional kind of home bases and that the places in which the acts authorizing these pieces or these programs are traditionally included. So I'll just specifically mention the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program and then the WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program, folks typically think of those as kind of, not one and the same, but both part of the larger, with similar goals. They're both farmers market nutrition programs, but because WIC is in CNR, that program is dealt with here, and then the senior program is dealt with in the Farm Bill. And with that, I think that's it on CNR and the Farm Bill. I just want to share these resources that I find really helpful. Congress.org is a great place to go for Policy and Advocacy 101. You can go in, type in your zip code on the homepage, hit enter, and find out who your senators and members of Congress are, as Sarah mentioned earlier. And then NSAC has a really wonderful Farm Bill campaign website that I want to make sure to draw attention to. So I will now turn it over to Ned for any questions.
Thanks for that informative discussion and of what's in and what's different between the Farm Bill and Child Nutrition Reauthorization. Before we go to questions, I want to talk a little bit about nutrition incentives, because for at least some of the folk on the phone call, those are important. Creates within the Hunger-Free Community program incentive grants to provide its mandatory money that the U.S. must be appropriated. It's $100 million over the life of the bill, and it's starts at $15 million in the first year and winds up at $25 million in the second year. It's a comprehensive, well thought out, well designed entire piece of work creating nutrition incentives for SNAP at direct retail. In the House Ag Committee bill, nutrition incentives are created by expanding or amending the existing language for community food projects, and it doubles the money for that program, and it puts half of it, $5 million, to nutrition incentives. So there are nutrition incentives are in both farm bills. Clearly the stronger piece is in the Senate. Not only is it a well thought out piece of legislation, it's well funded. And so Folsom Wave is strongly supportive of the Senate provisions. I have a couple questions for you, Helen. What happens if the House passes the bill, the Senate passes the bill, they go to conference, and one body doesn't approve the conference? What comes out of conference? What happens then?
I missed the second part of that question. What happens if what now?
What happens if one body does not approve the conference version of the Farm Bill?
Gotcha. Great question. Yeah, and this is where, Sarah was saying earlier, kind of folks outside of Washington will look and just think that Congress is, not getting things done. But, I think that it's because what you're describing, Ned, can and does happen. So, it's possible that it'll get to a point where we just cannot move forward. And, folks might have seen in mainstream media, there are predictions that funding levels or rather amounts of cuts to the SNAP program could be that holdup this time around. The Senate bill has much less substantial cuts to SNAP than does the House. And there's also some differences on commodity programs that, ultimately when you get to conference, they might just not be able to agree upon, and then the bill's kind of are on hold until those things can be resolved.
Okay. And then someone asked a question, it's a little off point for this topic, but want to assure them it'll be answered, about how to get school gardens built into the school curriculum, but I think that's something we can address offline.
Sure, yeah. Feel free to follow up with me offline about that.
Mm-hmm. And then when I used the nutrition incentives because that's the language in the Farm Bill, but in the vernacular, that's the double value coupon program. It's the double up. It's any of the myriad of matching programs that helps people on food stamps buy at farmers markets.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ned, because my slide also said nutrition incentives. But, you know, and this happens a lot that you've got specific great examples like what Wholesome Wave has done or Fair Food Network's Double Up Food Bucks. But, you know, ultimately when you're trying to write legislation, you try to be broad and catchy so that you really have members of Congress who understand what you're referencing.
Okay, and someone asked, how does an individual and organization get invited to testify as an expert at committee hearings?
Great question. So it is definitely an honor when someone gets to testify. It takes years of relationship building, like what Sarah described earlier. You know, spend years really getting your member of Congress to know who you are. And then what ultimately happens is, let's say they're going to have a hearing in the Ag Committee on farmers markets. So members of Congress on the Ag Committee will submit names of people that they want to be invited to testify. And that's when you having a good relationship with them becomes important. And then, you know, organizations also get asked to make suggestions. So, for example, NSAC or Wholesome Wave might get asked to give recommendations, and that's where, you know, you having spent years, you know, being willing to tell your story really matters.
Okay. And then there's another question that's more pertinent offline. If there are no other questions on the Farm Bill and what Helen had to present, we're going to transition over to Sarah to talk about what happened most recently. The Senate voted this morning with a strong vote of 75-22, I believe, to invoke cloture. And for those of you who need a refresher course on high school civics and what cloture was, because I know I sure did, Sarah's going to do a good job explaining cloture, and then talk a bit about what's coming down the pike in terms of action in the Senate and possibly the House as well. So Sarah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ned. And looks like I don't have control of the slides, but if someone could forward this one. Oh, perfect.
I got it.
We got it. That's all we needed. Great. Thank you. And thanks to Ned and Helen for fielding the questions, and to Helen for that super great, thorough 101. So all that said, where are we now? What's going on? As Helen said, both the House and Senate are at work on their version of the 2013 Farm Bill. The Senate was sort of the first out of the gate, and so for the past few weeks, the Senate has been off and on debating the Farm Bill on the floor, so with the full Senate. And what that means is when it's on the floor, that means any senator can introduce an amendment to sort of make a change to the bill. And where we're at right now is, over the past few weeks, over 200, I think we're probably at 250 plus amendments were filed that would change the Farm Bill. And the challenge with that is that debating each of those amendments takes a long time, and not all of them have been directly related to the bill, and some of it's gotten bogged down less in policy and more in politics. And so when that happens in the Senate, if the Senate leadership, so that's Majority Leader Harry Reid and Chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee, Senator Stabenow, if they cannot reach unanimous agreement with the Senate on sort of a trimmed down list of amendments, again, knowing that if they were to truly go through all 200, they would never get done. If they can't reach, they try to reach agreement on, okay, we're going to do a small set of them. If they cannot make agreement on that, what they can do, what Senate leadership can do, is invoke what we call cloture. And basically, cloture is simply a means to limit debate on a bill and keep the process moving forward. That happened this morning. It was approved 75 to 22. So that means 75 senators agreed that it was time to limit debate and keep the bill moving forward. What that does now is the clock is ticking. The Senate now has 30 hours of debate remaining, which sets them up for a scheduled final passage vote at 5:30 on Monday afternoon. It also means that any amendments that might have been filed that weren't directly related to the Farm Bill, sometimes you see writers, folks probably familiar with things like the Monsanto Protection Act, other writers, like if there's been amendments on flood insurance, amendments on healthcare, those things can't be considered once cloture happens because, again, those can derail the process. So the concern is, or sort of the good news is, the process keeps moving. The bad news is, and we literally had to change what we were going to tell you about an hour before this webinar, because we were still hopeful that once they passed that cloture vote, that the Senate might have come up with an agreement on a few amendments to here that were directly relevant to the bill, including several that have a really big impact on sustainable agriculture. Unfortunately, Senator Reid took to the floor about an hour ago and announced that there was no such agreement, and that they were going to hear one amendment on Monday and then move right to final passage. It doesn't 100% rule out the chance for a last-minute pitch, but it pretty much means that what we have in the Senate bill right now is what's going to go before them for a final passage vote on Monday. If you get an alert on Monday that says otherwise, hoo boy, it is time to move quickly, because we won't have much time, but the odds are effectively slim to none. So that's where we're at in the Senate. Once they take that final passage vote, the Senate's work is done until the House moves to pass a bill. So what's going on in the House? And this is where we're gonna need your help real soon. So the House is just a few weeks behind the Senate. Their committee, as Helen noted, has finished its bill, and it's now on to the House floor. They're likely to start debate the week of June 17th. As you can imagine, things are a little crazier in the House. There are many, many, many more representatives. The process looks a little different, but it's the same general approach in that there's a bill. There are many ways that both we, as the sort of good food and sustainable ag movement, would like to improve it, to ensure that there's good funding for the programs that we work on, to ensure the policy makes sense on the ground, to sort of reverse any bad cuts to programs like SNAP that we are not in agreement with. So there's a lot of work yet to do on that bill, and when it goes to the floor, it's our chance. It's our chance to speak out and our chance to have a say. And so so what you want to be ready for and kind of be looking for action on is that week of June 17th, provided nothing crazy happens, they don't slow down, which I can assure you it could happen. But right now, tentatively, June 17th is the week for action. You'll hear, if you're on the email list of the National Farm to School Network, of Wholesome Wave, of NSAC, you'll hear from us, and we will need you. Every call will count. There are over 400 representatives. Many of them don't work on farm policy very often. This is not something they deal with very often. So they especially need, and it's really critical that they hear from people like you who can assure them that this is an issue that does matter back home. That's especially going to be true in the House. And we can anticipate already there will be amendments that impact organics, local food, conservation, beginning farmers, and a host of other really key issues. We won't know the specifics yet. As Helen said, this process takes time, and Congress doesn't always give us as much time as we'd like to get organized. So we don't know yet. They have to decide to file it, and we have to figure that out. But in the next week, we'll know more. And every single one of you on the call has the ability to shape what comes out of the House, and we're going to need all the support we can get to get a decent bill coming out of the House of Representatives this summer. So stay tuned for that. Look for that. get ready to make a few phone calls, and we are so excited to have your help.
Thank you. I see Emerald from the great state of New Hampshire has raised her hand to ask a question. I'll ask her to get, if someone could unmute her, and let's hear what she has to ask.
Hi, Emerald. You're
Emerald.
unmuted.
Emerald. Oh, well. Let's see if we have any other written questions coming down the pike. Oh, I see. If there are no other questions, and I haven't had any come across the little message board recently, I just want to reiterate our desire, our hope that you take 5 minutes or so to complete SurveyMonkey and help us improve the product for the next go round. The recording and the presentations will be shared with the participants after this. And if there are no other questions, we can draw to a close this webinar. And I want to thank you all for registering and participating. And those of you who asked questions that didn't get answered, they were perhaps a little off point for this topic, but they were all very good, and someone will follow up with them and respond to you directly. So with that, I want to thank you and draw this to a close. And if you have any questions, follow up with any of us, and we'll do what we can to help you out. Thank you.